So now when it comes to lighting, let's do something that's fairly simple here. I'm going to get rid of this temporary point light, and instead let's highlight this pyro import, go up here to the shelf and say volume light. That's going to basically cause our heat field to emit light. Also be warned that that's going to cause your viewport to get really slow because it has to go through a very large cache. So when you highlight this, go to Enable in Viewport and check that off so that your scene doesn't freeze up. I brought back the environment, and with that, let's now adjust this exposure. I'm thinking a value of 2 is about what we want. So I'm looking at the light that's going away from the fire. I'd say maybe 2 or perhaps even 3. Let's go with 3. I think that makes sense for the amount of light that a campfire would give off. And the cool thing about doing a volume light like this is that as our flames move around, it's going to affect the illumination on the surrounding rocks, and that always looks really cool. While we have this, let's go to our material and adjust our smoke. I don't think we really need to change very much. I might just turn down the smoke a tad bit, so let's take our density scale to 0.5. The smoke brightness is a way of either brightening or darkening your smoke. I like changing the smoke color instead of this brightness. So if I want a darker smoke, I could do something like 0.1 and go like that. And I also kind of like having a bit of color to that smoke as well. This is probably too much color, honestly. So let's try something about right there. And then the scattering phase in this case is not going to make a huge difference, but it's asking you when light goes to hit the smoke, is it going to bounce back in the direction of the light, or is that light going to go through the smoke particles? If we set this negative, that means that smoke is bouncing back in the direction that light hits it. If we set this positive, then it's going to behave a little bit more like water or steam. So let's say -2. This is a bit more of a sooty sort of smoke that you would get from this. We're probably not going to see any major difference, honestly. So yeah, I just say, let's say -0.5 actually. That's a better value. And then our density scale, maybe 0.75, bring back some of that. And yeah, I think that that's pretty good looking. Let's also do one thing here in the out context, and that is enable motion blur. So say allow motion blur. We'll need to restart this, but let's leave that checked and then go to our pyro import here. Under, I believe it's sampling, we have velocity blur. So that's going to look at our velocity volumes and make motion blur based off of that. And then if we go to our camera, we can specify a shutter time. That means how long is the shutter open for. If we set this to a higher value, we're going to get more motion blur out of that. If it's a lower value, then we get less motion blur. So let's try something like 1.5, and then we'll restart this whole render and see what that gives us. All right, and after we do that, we have this, which makes a pretty big difference on the look. It's really selling the top of those flames more than anything else. So that motion blur is great. Be careful though, because I made the mistake of IPRing with this Mantra IPR, which doesn't have the same settings as the PyroSim. So be sure to specify that up here that you're using this PyroSim ROP, and just get rid of this Mantra IPR. We don't want that. Okay, so we do have this motion blur that's looking great. Let's also take a look at depth of field. So I'll pause that. I'm going to reframe this whole shot a little bit just to bring this in. So I'll go maybe right about there just to make the fire a bit bigger in the frame. Let's go back to our object, highlight the render cam, unlock the camera, and let's adjust this focus distance so that it's lining up nicely with the fire. If we do that, and then we go to this sampling, we have this f-stop here, and we can turn that down to add more depth of field if we'd like. So right now I'm at 10. Let's try maybe like 6. and see what that does. So we'll unpause this and see what happens. All right, and I think we're looking pretty good. Now, on the ground material, I didn't make this texture that's on there, and it's pretty low resolution. So you can either try to retexture this, or you can go to this noise here and say enable noise displacements, and that will just add a slight displacement across all these rocks to just make it appear a little bit more detailed if you'd like. So we can check that. It'll obviously take a lot longer to render it that way, but I just want to let you know that that is something I added right here. Besides that, I think we're good to go. Feel free to adjust this however you'd like. And in the next video, if you use Redshift, I'm going to show you what I do to get this same setup going, except using Redshift, and that's going to render a lot faster than Mantra. There are a few more tricks that you have to do to make this workflow work with Redshift, and so I'll talk about that in the next few videos. And if you're not into Redshift, then just go ahead and skip towards the end. I have a few more closing thoughts that I'd like to talk about, and we'll call this course complete.